Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today I've got the Rike 1505. This will be the full review of this knife. So I do have a first impressions. This will be a little more lengthy. I'll speak to some of the things that I've noticed over use. Also, I'll try to mention there's going to be a new version of this knife coming out. And so kind of as we go through, I may mention the odd thing that I would say I'd like to see altered a little bit. Okay, so just because we know that there's a new version coming out, and maybe you'd like to get in on that action too. So go ahead in the comments below and talk about, hey, I like the knife, but what about this feature or that feature? And we can have a little bit of fun with making suggestions that maybe could be implemented on the new version of this knife that should be coming out. I don't know what the time frame is. I've just heard from some reliable places that there is a new sort of an updated 1505 coming out. So let's go ahead and get into this. Size and weight on this very briefly. 3 and 15/16, so just over 3/4 of an inch on the blade, or just over 3 3/4 of an inch on the blade. 5-inch handle, and of course these two nicely work out, so 8 and 13/16, or just over 8 3/4 on the knife overall. Now it is a little hefty, okay, so it comes in at 6.6 ounces, and I've got to say this, at the price point and for where this knife is coming from and stuff, this is a knife I feel like should be milled out. Okay, so if you remember the video on this knife, there is some pretty substantial milling on the scales here. Same with this knife. By the way, that was the real steel. This is the Rike, or the Rike Knives Torrent. And I'll try to, when I zoom in there a little bit and talk about the handle, I'll show you those. But they're both overseas production knives, sort of higher end like the Rike is. The difference is they have pretty significant milling in the handle, which does lighten them up an awful lot. So I'll probably bring those back in a second. A comparable knife, if you are trying to get a sense for how heavy that is, if you've got a zero tolerance 0560 or a 0300, you're looking at a similar weight. In fact, this is even still a little heavier. All right, so weight is, now I've carried this an awful lot, guys, and I'll be honest, anything under 7 ounces, I don't know, even sometimes over 7 ounces, it doesn't bother me that much. Okay, so I'm fairly open-minded, especially when the knife is as large as this one is. I do like larger knives, and when it's solid titanium. If I'm carrying around a solid titanium knife, you expect to see a little more weight than, let's say, if this was just a titanium frame side and G10 or something else. Okay, so those are some qualifiers that I feel like I need to put in there for those of you who are gonna, get right off the bat say, oh, the knife is too heavy. It's a little heavy, I will grant that, but to me, it's not that big of a deal. All right, so let's move on now to the blade, and I will zoom in for this. This is a blade I should grab. I've got to grab another knife here. I'll zoom in the meantime and put this up. I think I can reach it. Okay, I do have one other knife that I'll roll into the comparison here. Because these blades kind of remind me of one another. So there is the S35 VN bead blasted finish drop point blade on the Rike 1505. Pretty attractive blade, I will say. I like the features. I like the top swedge. I like the fuller groove, and even the hole that kind of works as a thumb hole. Although I will say it's comfortable because it's kind of really well contoured there, so there's no sharp edges. The only problem with that is because there's no sharp edges, holy cow, the focus just went wild. There we go. Because there's no sharp edges, you can't really get a good hold on this to use it to deploy the knife. All right, so that's kind of less than ideal, but it does work. You saw there that I was able to get the knife open with a little bit of care. Now what I want to compare here is the blade on the Benchmade 757. I don't know about you, but to me, these knives have some similarity. Not only are they similar in, the fact that Notice how all the belly on this knife is right out here, and you get a similar thing happening on the Benchmade. So if you've used a knife, if you've used one of these, you kind of have an idea then what you're dealing with. The other similar thing about these blades is the Benchmade is thicker, but they both have pretty thick blade stock, which is actually brought down to a thin enough edge that they actually slice really well. Now this is S35VN, so it's a little better kind of all around than S30V. And I will say this holds an edge really well. I actually cut a bunch of cardboard up the other day with this blade. Number one, notice that it didn't mark up the bead blasted coating. That is a downside to me. I'm not a big fan of bead blasted blades because they will mark. Okay, you know, they scratch up a little easier than other finishes. I'd prefer to see, you know, a satin or a stone washed finish here, but that's, you know, that's sort of a discussion for a different day. Or even on a knife like this, you know, where there's already, it's kind of a cool looking knife, and Rike tends to do some different things. You could actually do multi finishes on this. You know, if you could do part of it satin, maybe even leave some bead blast on it just for contrast. Anyway, so yeah, the bead blast finish is maybe not my favorite feature in the whole world. It is fairly thickly ground. It's a flat ground blade, and it's a good combination. I will say I've done a lot of cutting with this. It does cut. It does what you want it to do while still having a fairly hefty grind here. There's a lot of material. Another blade that I would compare would be the 0560. Again, you know, there's a lot of material here, but it's taken down to a thin enough edge that it actually cuts well. So both of these I find, and the Benchmade, do a good job of getting good performance out of a fairly hefty blade. Okay, one other blade I want to bring in here, and this demonstrates what I'm talking about when I say, you know, what if you did a couple of different finishes. Here on the Rike Knives Torrent, you've got a really dark stone wash and then a really beautifully satin ground bevel. And something like that on this knife I think would look really cool. So that kind of gives you, there's my take on the blade. It is a useful blade, and I do like, the performance has been great for me. You know, I don't know, I found it better than I expected considering how thick the blade stock actually is. And the bead blast has held up really well also. So great combination of sort of toughness and usefulness out of that blade. What about lockup and deployment? Well, it is a very free dropper, okay? It just wants to be, you know, it just moves. Let me see if I can do, hold on. Sorry about that. Let that thing come into focus. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, you probably can't see it on camera, but if I move the handle, this will almost, you know, move freely. There's a little bit of resistance there, but not a whole lot. Actually, it's almost the perfect amount that allows you to kind of get your fingers out of the way before the knife closes. Okay, so very, very free dropper. Well done, ball bearing pivot on this knife. It is very, very solid lockup. Now, over time, I've had to tighten this. This is not a knife that, you know, you can skip the, this is not a knife where you can skip the Loctite. You do need to Loctite this pivot. I haven't done it yet, and so over the last few weeks as I've used it, I don't know why the camera is going out of focus as often. Normally it doesn't do that. Over the time that I've used this knife, it has loosened up, and every, you know, few days or so I've got to tighten it up. I will put some Loctite on it, and I'm confident that that will alleviate that little challenge there. Okay, so very good deployment, very smooth, very fast. Let me say this though, hold on. There we go. The detent on this is not going to be, you know, it's not like something from Rike. Now this is what I would call a moderate detent. The Liangma Remedy had a stronger detent than this, and this has a fairly strong detent. This one is not as strong, but it's obviously very, I mean, it functions just fine, okay? But to sort of give you an idea, if you've got any of the modern ZTs, these are very common, so I find they're helpful to sort of give you an idea. The newer ZTs, they all tend to have a pretty stiff detent, and it does help deploy the knife pretty promptly. This is not as stiff, but it's maybe a little bit smoother. So you end up getting a pretty fast deployment. Also, the blade is pretty heavy in this, which does help with deployment. If you look over here on the lock bar side, you can see it is a titanium frame lock. You can see that there's a lock bar insert here. I don't know if I can catch the light for you guys to be able to see, but if you can see the stainless steel here, and you can also see it extend back here behind, which serves as an over travel stop. I can't be sure that you'll be able to see that on camera, but I'll try to. There you go. I'll move those angles a little bit. As we're here, kind of look into that handle and notice that there's no milling at all, as I was pointing out. And since we're looking at this angle, notice it's a fairly thin relief cut, which, you know, I'm not a fan of. I like to see something a little thicker there, especially on a knife this is a pretty bulky knife already. So on a very heavy, very bulky knife, you'd like to see a thicker relief cut than this one has, but it's not the end of the world, okay? For most of us, you know, most of us are not buying knives that we want to pass Cold Steel's testing protocols that they put a knife through, and a thicker detent does make it stronger there. So that's, you know, it's one of those things. And on the new version, it would be cool to see a thicker relief cut and some milling on that handle. Otherwise, though, lockup and deployment, very, very good. In fact, I wouldn't even suggest, I don't think they need to change the, I don't think they need to change the stainless steel bearings to, you know, something like this, right, is, hold on, sorry guys. Something like this, of course, has the dual row ceramic ball bearings. Well, you know, that's great, but I wouldn't suggest changing to that, or even something like this with the needle bearings, which, by the way, are, you know, they're like little roller bearings, little, you know, cylinders instead of spheres, right? And again, you know, in the new version, they don't necessarily need to change that. I think the smoothness on this is just fine. Let me show one other thing that I do think is really cool. Check out the back of the blade here. How far do I have to open it where you can see it? So right there, hold on, right there, see that rounded cutout? It perfectly matches, let me show you from the back here, perfectly matches that stop pin. So the stop pin is almost gone when the knife is open. I really like that feature, not only because it kind of looks cool, it finishes the knife off nicely, but also it provides a great deal of surface area on that stop pin, so that over time, as this blade impacts that stop pin over and over again, you've got a larger wear surface and therefore more lifespan out of that. So I do really like when a knife kind of has that wraparound feature over the stop pin. Let's look at the handle now. And the handle is that nicely blue anodized titanium, looks really sharp. I do like that it's smooth. You know, this is the Rike that stood out to me the most because it has more of those smoother lines. It doesn't have all that angular stuff going on that a lot of these knives have. So I do really appreciate that. It's extremely comfortable in hand. Let me say that. To be fair, this knife is extremely comfortable. Really, really well done. I also love the fact that it's got these two cutouts that really allow you to choke up on the knife. And when I was doing some cardboard cutting, I used this grip and it worked really, really well. So I do love that option of that finger choil at the front and the matching sort of thumb rest here. Really, really well done. It is a titanium backspacer, which does add some weight to the knife, but they weren't shooting for weight saving on this knife anyway, okay? Very functional pocket clip, although on the newer versions this clip has been changed, although it works just fine. It's also single position, and the lanyard hole is nice. I like when they incorporate the lanyard hole into the handle this way. It does go through, to give you an idea how much titanium is in that backspacer. So look where that lanyard hole is, okay? And know that it is through the backspacer. So the backspacer doesn't go around behind it, it goes through it. Which means you've got a fair bit of metal out here at the back end of the knife, okay? So that's the handle. Very well done handle. Nothing really to complain about except for the milling. I would like to see that milled out fairly aggressively, and that would save a lot of weight on this knife and probably get it down under 6 ounces, which I think would be a real win. Okay, so let's back out. There you go, a little bit more. So my overall impressions on this knife, really, really well done. And in preparing for this, I did go and look at a few other reviews of Rike knives that I could find. And I didn't, you know, in terms of quality and fit and finish, they seem to be doing a really, really good job. I will say most retailers are now carrying a few different models of Rike knives. For a while, you were pretty much getting them. Darth Blader on Instagram was the main place to get these, but now most of the retailers have got a few models at least, and I imagine that's just going to kind of increase over time. So there you go. That's my take on what I believe is a very nice knife. Now let me say one thing about sort of the role that I feel like this knife and a few other of these higher end Chinese production knives fit into. These are knives that, you know, they meet that desire that some of us have for something a little more special, a little more high end than, you know, a Spyderco Para 2 or you know, whatever else, a Cold Steel Recon 1. You know, this is certainly, you know, the materials are nicer, the design is a little nicer, more interesting, but, you know, you don't break the bank on this. Now, yes, I know something like this, okay, is a little more expensive, but I don't carry this as often. I'm a little more careful of when and where I carry this. This one I don't feel like I need to be that careful because, you know, a little mark here or there on it is not the end of the world based on the price point. Now these, I don't know what the newer version, it may be priced more in line with some of the other. I think recently I've seen some other Rike knives going for around 300 bucks. And so maybe the 1505, when these were first released, they weren't that much. I think they were around 150 bucks, which is great. You know, that's a really nice price point to be at. Some of the other ones may be higher, okay? So I don't know what the newer version of this is going to be offered at. Let's hear your thoughts. I'd love to know, you know, in this knife, when they come out with the new version, what are some of the changes you'd like to see? Overall, I would recommend these, although they're not that easy to find. If you can get a hold of one, don't hesitate. They're really well done, and I think anyone would be very satisfied to have this as sort of an EDC knife or a high-end carry knife or whatever. There you go, guys. We'll talk to you soon.